Hi everyone, welcome. We're down here in my wormery, and out on my bench, as you can see, we've already got the system that we're going to be checking in on today. These are European nightcrawler worms that were placed into here in a very, very small number. Fewer than 200 were thought to originally populate this system. That's an estimate we all came up with together. And the reason we started small was because we didn't know what to expect. This is the system in which we placed a whole bunch of castings, boulders is what I refer to it as, these little hard objects that wouldn't go through my screen when I was sifting my vermicompost. And I made an entire system out of this stuff. And the whole idea was that the worms might break down the boulders at some point, but that never really happened. I wanted to keep things super damp, so the shallower top tray has holes in it. So in the very beginning, we were keeping this thing quite heavily saturated, and at some point we were just satisfied with the moisture level, and the plastic coverings have been keeping things with their existing moisture level rather than any needing to be added more recently. So they're due for their next feeding now. It's been 2 weeks since we last checked in on them, so I believe that they're probably due. There's been a interesting feeding pattern going on here that I refer to as ping-pong style. Sometimes I'll do my feeding patterns in a way that I go from, different corners, like a pocket feeding style is the way I've come to refer to that pattern. Sometimes it's the ping-pong style like we've been doing here, which is nothing more than just alternating which side of the bin you're feeding each time. And I checked my notes, and it does seem that it's been about 5 months now since we started into the ping-pong feedings here, going back and forth, moving their feeding from one side of the bin to the other. And today we're going to do the same. You kind of have some evidence over here showing where the last feeding got applied. And after we check out what's going on in there, we'll proceed to setting up their new feeding on the opposite edge. Let's explore to see how they did with their last feeding. Usually if there's still leftovers of the last feeding, I'll pick them out, even if we have large chunks of bedding type materials that could be recycled and reused to build up the feeding zone on the other side. So like I already see some good candidates here. We've got a banana stem. And I suppose there's no harm in just bringing a few worms over with the leftovers into the side of the bin that they're going to be corralled over to anyway. Well, I'm not even corralling them, right? Because I'm just setting up something new that they're welcome to come explore. So I'm not, I'm not curtailing their movement or trying to push them to do anything per se. I don't know if it's visible. It should be. A couple of these worms, especially this one here, caught my eye, with the really bulging clitellum. And I think I see similar signs of really plump midsections on some of these worms. The clitellum is that little saddle, I think some people refer to it as, that little bulge. More visible on some of these types of worms than on others. Like on the Indian blue worms, they're hardly even visible that there is one, but it's there. It's just about the same diameter of the rest of the body, and it doesn't really stand out much. Other types of worms, it's a clearly visible feature of their body. Alright, now we're definitely seeing leftovers. These look like the peels of potato. So potato peel and banana must have been part of the last feeding. I don't really recall the details of the last feeding per se. I did sort of scrub through the video from the last time just to see how things looked, but after a while things get a little bit repetitive, and unless I take the time to actually watch the video and listen to what was being discussed, I could be completely overlooking something we agreed to do last time in here. I mean, just from the title of the video last time, I think we did at least acknowledge the fact that the system is at an age now. And before I forget, I did prepare some info about the system to share with you, so let's just go over this really quick before we continue. The age now at 226 days, sort of like another pair of my systems that just passed 200 days of age at day 214 when I fed them. I think it might have been yesterday, day before. I was already tailoring the types of bedding that I was going to be giving them, to be stuff that wouldn't break down slowly, like leaf stems or even the foods, you know, banana stems are another one of those things that go really slow. So I was definitely feeding in such a way that I was trying to give them stuff that wouldn't just end up sitting there as leftovers. I wanted stuff that would go pretty quickly. So that's kind of my thinking here too. But the one thing I was thinking about doing here was to actually converting this system into a wedge configuration. So here's the rest of the stats on how many times they were fed. And it was 2 weeks ago when we last checked in. I think we mentioned that already. But what I wanted to do now, after 5 months of ping-ponging back and forth with the feedings, I think I'm going to be converting this system to a wedge. And you know, the wedge is really just, you know, just like the shape of a wedge. One end of it is very small, perhaps even pointy to the point where there's no height at all. It just comes to a point and then it gets, you know, bigger. On the opposite side, you've got the thicker side. And that just really kind of indicates a gradient from small to large is the reason it's, you know, kind of used as a way to describe what's going on in your worm bin, because what's happening in the worm bin that goes from, you know, high to low or big to small is the amount of food. And if you decide to feed only on one side of the bin, then that's the side of the wedge that you might consider to be the thicker side, the one where there's always a supply of food, leaving the opposite side to be the opposite, right? With very little food remaining. So my thinking was, well, what just happened over there? Oh, I see a cocoon right there. Cool. Not too surprising since we're seeing bulging clitellums. That's your quiz. You know what that means, right? If you don't remember, go back to the video and review what was talked about earlier. So, yeah, cocoons are always a good thing to see, especially in a system where you populated the container with very few worms. And I think the worms sense that, you know, they're like, hey, there's not a lot of people around here. What do you say we, or not a lot of people, what am I talking about? There's not a lot of worms around here. Let's see if we can change that. See if we can populate the space with more wormies. And that's what the worms will tend to do. So even though this system was launched with what was thought to be, I believe the number is 134, it always sticks in my mind because it keeps coming back up in the comments, and when I talk about how this system was launched, it was a very, very small population tasked with helping us break down all these little boulders. And I think we've already come to the conclusion over the past few check-ins that they're not doing much with the boulders. The only possible way of seeing all these little things, and by the way, these are the boulders, right? All these little rolly chunks. The only way to make those things gradually turn into a nice fine vermicompost would be to crush them all by hand. So my objective here has been to always kind of handle the material in a rough way, as long as I'm not injuring worms, to crush and crunch the boulders into a finer material and not leave them that way, since the worms aren't helping much. And, you know, I don't know how much time I want to spend on it is the bottom line. At some point in the future, I think I'll be able to screen this stuff once again, and a great quantity of what had been once in the form of boulders will probably be fine enough to go through my screen, and some of it won't. And what I'll be left with here is almost certainly, you know, leftover boulders, but I don't know if I'll be continuing with the whole concept of trying to guide boulders through some sort of a worm process to have them go from being boulders to nice, beautiful castings. I think boulders are just one of the hazards, pitfalls in the game, and they happen, you know? And I guess avoiding them is the one way, you know? Certain things can be fixed, good as new. Other things show signs of the fact that they were once not perfect and optimal and had to be repaired or put back together or cleaned up after getting soiled or whatever the case may be. So if you do go down that road, you might have to, you know, well, what road am I talking about here? I'm just talking about the castings boulders. I guess I'm just saying, if you end up with castings boulders, there might not be any easy way to correct for that other than individually breaking them up in your hands. All right, you know, let's let's get this feeding done. You know, I did think about this edge becoming the wedge and leaving the rest of the system to now kind of forage, if you will. But then I'm technically, I don't know. That's the thing. I have to decide whether I'm foraging within the entire system, continuing to feed, just adding no new bedding, allowing the worms to break down whatever remains in the system as leftovers as bedding. But you know, these systems just don't really have much of that at all. You know, so I don't know. At first, I thought I might be converting from a ping pong feeding pattern to a wedge, and then at some point, you know, ending up with all the worms over here, because maybe 2 or 3 times over we would just keep feeding on this side, creating that wedge with very little food left on the other side because no new food's been added, and all the food ending up on the other side. Or maybe you might think of it as this side is where all the new bedding and food gets added, so this is the side where there's very little vermicompost, whereas on the opposite side, what's over on the opposite side is almost entirely pure vermicompost. So I guess what I'm really struggling with here is if I really start driving them over here and not allowing them to work over there, what I'm going to be left with over there is not only a whole bunch of lingering leaf stems, as I see a whole bunch of, you know, throughout the material over here, but potato peels too, and other leftover stuff that I didn't manage to nip off, not to mention all that leftover bedding over there. So I don't know. I don't think we're going to go wedge, even though I thought it might be a good idea today. But I think just the nature of the way the last feeding had been set up, it does seem like we should somehow be trying to promote traffic all throughout the system. And at this point, I'm just going to continue, I guess, one more ping pong style. But if we do want worms working what's on that side, corralling them or, you know, luring them to the opposite side doesn't really get us any closer to the objective of seeing all the stuff over there broken down neatly. It'll just be left there abandoned as the worms all strive to get access to what's being supplied over here on this side. So I am second guessing the idea that I had, that, you know, perhaps one side of this ping pong feeding would simply transform into the wedge end of the bin, and that we'd continue that way. I think we're going to go one more on the ping pong here, but now I do feel like something would have to be a little bit different if we really want to start seeing all the stuff that's throughout this container, leftover bits of bedding and food. I think I do think that maybe a foraging phase will be important here, and keeping, you know, kind of driving the worms to hang out only in one section of the bin is going to end up producing kind of substandard results, not exactly what we want. So, all right, sorry that I kind of went back and forth there, but I do kind of think there's value in not getting too locked in on some sort of a game plan just because you had the brainstorm early on in the day that this is what you want to do. If for whatever reason there are indications that would suggest that going about your work would be better off in some other way, I think there's value in being able to remain flexible from that point of view. So perhaps this will be the last time we ping pong, and then at some point in the future, perhaps during the next check-in, I believe we would probably will consider these systems as foraging. So that right there, those pieces of paper towel we added, will most likely become the last application of bedding in here. We'll keep coming back to feed them, and we'll probably feed in a more scattered way to keep promoting worm traffic all over. And then we'll possibly consider today as the beginning of foraging, which means the next time would include no new bedding, only food, and then the period starting from this point forward would really be considered as foraging. So I know last time we referred to as a system not being in foraging yet, but probably will be soon. Let's make it official. These worms are now foraging. That little bit of bedding that they got along with the food is the end of the line. You saw there was still a bunch of leftover bedding, shredded paper cardboard from the previous feeding 2 weeks ago over there, and even little bits of it throughout. So I think they'll be good from that point of view. Next time we come in here, we'll give them only food, maybe some grit, and that'll be it. And we'll start trying to track how are the leaf stems coming along, How are other things throughout the material coming along? Potato peels, etc. Hopefully at some point we'll come up with material that might still have boulders in it, but might be considered as harvestable soon. So that's our new game plan. Nothing like being flexible and adaptive. Alright everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.